Good morning, everyone. I'm Tony Lockley, Juvenile Justice Planner for the Governor's Crime Commission, and I will be sharing information about the Juvenile Justice Planning RFA and 2021 funding priorities.
Tony, we lost sound. It's showing you're muting.
Okay. The application deadline is January 31st, 2021. It's funded through the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. The Governor's Crime Commission is the state administering agency, and that information can be found at the link provided below. The following entities in North Carolina are eligible to apply for funding under the identified JJ Planning Committee program priorities: local government agencies, local law enforcement, state government agencies, state law enforcement, and nonprofits, including faith-based and community organizations. The grant project period is January 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2023. Fiscal year 2021 Title II and Children's Justice Act funding is for 2 years. Applicants are required to apply for grant funding through the GCC online application process, and that information can be located at the link provided. And to access GEMS and apply for a grant, you can go to the link provided for GEMS. Additionally, all applicants must provide proof that they have a valid federal DUNS and are currently registered with SAM.gov. A screenshot from SAM.gov reflecting this information is sufficient. And just to reiterate, as I mentioned earlier, for tips for a strong application, be sure that your SAM registration is up to date weeks before when you apply. The NCID, you must have one to use the online GCC application. And to obtain the NCID and password, you can get the information from the link provided. If you have difficulties, you can contact the ITS service desk. They're reachable 24 hours a day. And the NCID functionality is external to the NCDPS. The mission statement for the Juvenile Justice Planning Committee. The JJPC provides resources for youth at risk of becoming delinquent due to individual, school, peer, and/or community factors. Resources provide services for youth who are undisciplined or involved in the juvenile court process. Funding priorities for 2021 are as follows: raise the age implementation, sustainability and support. It requires process changes, program expansion, and infrastructure support. The influx of the 16 and 17-year-olds into the juvenile justice system changes the juvenile justice system's capacity and approach. Juvenile serving agencies, including local entities, will need support in implementing raise the age. Some solutions: provide training to law enforcement working with juveniles, offer crisis and assessment solutions as alternatives to detention, referral of services to prevent recidivism or penetration into the system, intervention strategies. Programming ideas include interagency training, conferences or workshops to comply with raise the age, funding to support additional attorneys, social workers, investigators, and material services for juvenile public defenders offices, funding to support prosecution, investigators and clerks for juvenile prosecution offices, and funding to support multi-systemic therapy services for delinquent juveniles. School justice partnerships. Create the creation of partnerships, grant requests for creating safer school environments, focus on more effective alternatives to suspension for minor discipline problems, and alternatives such as teen court, crisis and assessment services, academic coaches, school-based community service, and restitution. 2021 racial ethnic disparities, or RED. Youth of color are more likely to be disciplined, suspended, and expelled. Less likely to be diverted, more likely to be held in secure detention, and overrepresented at key points throughout the juvenile justice system. GCC supports efforts to reduce racial and ethnic disparities in the juvenile justice system. Applications for this priority must explain how their project aims to reduce disparities and/or promote racial equity. And this is the 2021 Racial Ethnic Disparities Evaluation Worksheet. And we ask that you fill this out when you're applying and upload it in along with your app when you submit your application. You supply your project name, how you plan to provide direct services to youth, the estimated number of youth you plan to serve or will be served, describe the demographics of the youth served by your program, race, gender, etc., whether or not your staff members for the project have received training related to racism or racial equity, how familiar your project staff is with racial ethnic disparities or disproportionate minority contact. Does your program fit with the national best practices for red reduction? List the specific steps your program will take to evaluate red reduction, and how will you know if your program was effective at reducing red? 2021 Children's Justice are intended for systems change to improve the handling and outcomes of child maltreatment. And these programs funded include improving investigative, administrative, and judicial handling of child sexual abuse and exploitation, cases involving suspected child maltreatment related fatalities, and focuses on serving intrastate and interstate cases, reducing trauma to victims and families. It also supports programs that improve resolutions of civil and criminal court proceedings, that enhance judicial and administrative actions in child abuse and neglect cases, enhances performances of court-appointed attorneys and guardians ad litem for children, and ensures procedural fairness to the accused. Also, it supports reforming state laws, ordinances, regulations, protocols, and procedures providing protection for children, and that may include children in reports of child abuse and neglect with a combination of jurisdictions such as intrastate, interstate, federal, and tribal, and may involve child abuse and neglect, including sexual abuse and exploitation. Are there any questions?
Hey, everybody, just a reminder, for any questions, please throw them down to the chat and we can help answer them there. You're muted, but I've got a question. Are there any specific allowable or unallowable costs?
Can I answer that one, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Am I unmuted? Okay, so this is Diane. I'm responding to the question about allowable and unallowable costs. So Tony provided you the priorities, the 4 priorities that we have under juvenile justice. The first 3 priorities, raise the age, school justice partnerships, and RED, are actually under DOJ, whereas the 4th priority, children's justice, is from DHHS. And so the Children's Justice Act grants, let me speak to that first, are generally available for systems change. They're not so much for the same type of work. But it is, and so they also have a different list of allowable and unallowable than the DOJ priorities, because they're from 2 different federal funding sources. In general, the same basic types of things are available for JJ as they are for our other funding sources, and that would include things like salary, travel, fringe benefits, training, just the general cost of providing direct services to youth in your community. So those are your basic services and types of items that would be allowable under those priorities. I saw another question, but I couldn't read it because it disappeared off my screen.
Okay, there was a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
There was a question about allowable and unallowable cost. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was the one I was calling myself like those are the basic costs that are allowable, or like direct service costs.
I've got another question. How much funding is available for these grants?
So for this is Diane again. So for JJ juvenile justice, we generally receive from DC and grant out somewhere around $1 million for the projects that we have. And so in general, most of the projects are not nearly as large as might be in some of our other funding streams. They generally tend to be somewhere between generally less than a couple $100,000 for the project, so that we can try to fund several projects across the funding stream. So we're looking at, but we will fund definitely projects that are much lower than that as well. So, but it's just that if a project is coming in, say, for instance, $500,000 and we only have $1 million for the funding stream, it needs to be a really strong project across a really large area because you're taking up half the money that we have. So we generally look at smaller projects through these funding streams. And the same with Children's Justice Act. We get approximately another $500,000 in that funding stream and generally try to do about 2 projects. So they generally run $200, $250 a piece.
The 20% match, how much can be in-kind match and how much needs to be cash match?
So we don't specify how you break your matching, just that you meet your match.
Oh, also, and there is no in-kind match for juvenile justice projects.
But we do have a match waiver process, so you can also request a match waiver for a JJ grant if you feel like you're not going to meet, your organization has some hardship that will keep them from being able to meet the match.
Diane, this is Caroline. There's another question on here from a nonprofit that says, if we offer school-based healthcare center services, mental health services included within local high schools, would an alternative to suspension or detention programs be applicable as a potential project?
We offer school-based healthcare services, mental health services. I guess I'm not really sure about the question. I don't know. Is she asking us, would this count as one of the, be able to apply in one of the priorities we outlined? Amy?
Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, I was just wondering, we have school-based health centers that offer primary mental health care within the high schools in our county. And I was just wondering if some type of alternative to suspension, we do some work with juvenile justice, if like counseling for kids on probation or some type of a program was set up like that, would that be?
Oh yeah, that would, yeah, I could see that as an alternative. And also in this case, we also fund school-based mental health services through VOCA, where you actually could apply for more money through that program, where you concentrate on the fact that a lot of these at-risk kids have had experiences, you know, through ACEs or whatever, you could be evaluating those that have put them, or where they have been victimized or can be counted as a victim. And so this could actually then become a victim service, because you identify, because under VOCA, secondary exposure to victimization can also count as a victim. So, for instance, if you live in a house where your mother or your family is engaged in domestic violence or has, had issues with domestic violence, then you could be a secondary victim, and so you would be eligible for victim-based services. But you also could, so you could look at that project and frame it in multiple ways, so that you could either apply under JJ or apply under VOCA for that project, depending on how you frame up the services and present your argument.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, and it's not that we don't require a match. JJ does ask for a match in those priorities. You can request a match waiver. That's what we say. We have a match waiver process. So the default is that you will provide match. If you cannot provide match, or you're facing extraordinary hardships where you cannot provide the match, then you can request a match waiver. Are there any other questions? I don't see anything else in the chat that I don't think that I've answered. All right, so at this time, not seeing any questions, we thank you all for your attendance at the workshop. And yeah, if you have some future questions, at this point, we don't have a JJ lead planner. Tony and I are kind of tag teaming this. So if you have any future questions, please feel free to give either one of us an email. And we will be able to respond to that. I don't think we have our email addresses up in this particular presentation, but yeah, Josh is going to post it. And in addition, you can access our contact information through the GCC website and get our emails and contact phone numbers as well. The email works a lot better for me. Actually, Josh just posted our emails. So if you need to ask a question about the JJ, you can contact either of us using those email addresses. And Josh, is this recorded? And this presentation will be recorded. And all of the recordings, as well as the PowerPoints and the RFAs, will be available on our website within the next couple of days for sure. All right, so in that case, thank you everyone and have a great afternoon. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everybody.